Good morning, good evening, and good day. Thank you so much for watching Attack Power Gaming. Today, we continue our How to Get Good at Steel Division 2 series with defense and how to successfully defend your territory in Steel Division 2. If you enjoy this content, please hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing for more ST2 type content. And if you really enjoy this content and want more of it, or really just want to support me or get coaching, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Let's dive right in. So our first topic today with defense is cover. So that's the first thing we can talk about is cover. So when building a defensive line, the first thing you need to consider is how can you put your troops in cover and try to keep their troops out of cover? So the more often you can create a cover disparity, the more often you can find victory when defending. So we can see here in this defense, I have all my infantry in buildings. That is a must. If you're in a townish situation or whenever you possibly can, basically, you generally want your infantry to be in buildings. If they can't be in buildings, heavy forests are an acceptable replacement because it's still green cover, but you will notice most of the time dudes in buildings will beat dudes in the forest for the most part. Yellow forest is not ideal for defense for infantry because they can still be seen pretty easily, and you can see in terms of their range they still can get shot from pretty far away and not be close enough to hit, you know, say an armored unit with their AT weapon. So that's really important to realize that yellow cover is not great for infantry, but it is of course great for armored stuff because that's the only cover they can go in. So by putting these in this yellow cover, I force enemy armor to get nice and close where these guys actually have a chance at killing what they are attacking. So considering that cover disparity is extremely important. When he attacks here, he's going to either have to hop through the buildings or go across, and as long as I keep my troops really nicely in the buildings here, they should have a good chance of actually winning any combat. The other thing is too, is it keeps your troops hidden, you know, until they reveal themselves or something happens that they can be seen. So it is really, really important that you consider the cover when setting up your defense, and that's why when defending, you have to think a little bit more ahead and kind of see, okay, where are potential defensive lines? So I have a defensive line here potentially if I can push forward, and then of course I have this really natural defensive line right here on the edge of the hill. So I should be taking advantage of that. When I look in the town here, I have to look at where the natural lines of buildings are here. So a natural line would be right here where it can cover into this defense, right? And then kind of right here at the edge, because a lot of these buildings can see over to here, right? And then we have another one right about here, another like patch of buildings that can be worked into a defense. And then we have another one right here. So it's these kind of like patches of buildings that you can use to create your front line. And you want to be careful. If you create too big of a bulge, then you're liable to get flanked. You're going to get attacked from other angles. It's dangerous. Okay, and for example here, I can't defend anything out here because there's no cover to be had. So I'm not going to try to set up defenses out here in the open. I'm going to keep them on this ridge and on this hill. And even though I'd love to grab more territory, unless I can get all the way up to here, and that's still not great because these infantry are going to be completely unsupported. And that brings us to our second topic of defending, and that is making sure you have a mix of troops that can deal with all kinds of threats. So infantry, of course, the meat and potatoes of your front line, right? They do most of the work. They do a lot of the fighting. They're the thing that actually holds the ground. But they are useless if they have no support. So we can see here, this part of my line has no other units to support them. So this T-34 can really just bully as much as it wants. On the other hand, over here I have AT weapons to help support these infantry along with some AT on my infantry as well. And before I did have a tank here that died. If I go up here, you can see these infantry are supported by some armored cars and armor along with this Rashitsa over here. So a good defense is made up of a whole number of different types of units so that you can actually deal with different threats successfully. If you just have infantry, or you just have tanks, or you just have AT, or you just have anything, you know, just having one type of thing is always bad. Okay, there's always a counter to everything in this game. So if you only have one type of thing, it's very easy to counter those units. So it's extremely important that you have a mix of troops on your front line if you truly want a really strong defense. Okay, you need that mix in order to deal with a variety of threats and make sure the enemy isn't able to easily overwhelm your defenses with a certain type of unit. And that, of course, is based on division as well, right? Because some divisions just don't have a lot of access to certain weapons. So you have to make exceptions and plans to cover for those weaknesses in the division build. So our next topic for defending is leaders. You absolutely want to make sure that you are veteraning your troops, because if you've set up a good defense, you should already have an advantage in cover. If you can get an advantage in veterancy as well, then you should truly have a very easy time forcing back any enemy attacks. So making sure that you sprinkle those leaders, excuse me, around your front lines, you know, close enough that are actually making a difference, and managing them properly, they can make a very, very big difference in the way you defend successfully. Our next topic of defense is Lairs and reserves. What I'm talking about here is not having a singular line of defense. So we can see here in this town, there's many layers of troops here that the opponent will have to beat through until he can get to my actual line here. So you can see I've got bags back here that are working their way. I have some AA cover. These guys are working their way up here to make sure that I have plenty of support to overwhelm their attack. So these layers of defense is very important. I'm not just putting everything right on the front line, and as much as that seems like it could be really effective, it actually can be quite bad, because it just allows your opponent to attack all of your stuff, and once they break through that, then you have nothing there at all. So when possible, having some sort of layers, and this is mostly applicable in towns and such, because usually in forests, if you want to fight, you kind of got to be on the edge of that forest, right? But when you're in towns, you can definitely set up troops in different buildings and such, so the opponent has to work their way through the layers of your defense as they go. Beyond that, in terms of layers in heavy forest, you want your close range infantry to be in this heavy forest area, and that kind of serves as another layer of defense. So even if the opponent breaks through this outer line of guys, like hitting them while they go through no cover, once they get in, they then have to kill the CQC infantry that are hiding within the forest. That can be a really effective way, because the opponent needs long range stuff in order to beat through these outside guys, but then they need close range stuff to beat through the guys inside. So that requires them to bring in twice as many kinds of troops to actually successfully capture a forested area like that. So make sure you use layers to your advantage, so that the opponent has to slowly grind their way through constant disadvantaged attacks in order to make any sort of progress. Our next topic is line of sight. So when you are on defense, you get to dictate the pace of the engagement in that area. And it's really important that you consider this when setting up your defenses. So the setting up troops on the edge of the woods here allows you to control exactly how far you want to have your engagement area. So if you want your Hotchkits here, for example, to shoot at literally anything going, you put it right on the edge of the forest and it will shoot at literally anything that comes in range. On the other hand, if you don't want it to engage anything, really you should probably just back it up like this and put it in a place like this, so that it's only engaging troops in this one little window of the map. Okay? That way then, you control when the engagement occurs. Maybe you don't want to engage troops all the way out at the 1,000-meter range. You want to engage them closer. So you set that up so that that happens. Same with this, like, Rashitsa here. Rashitsa, excuse me. You know, I could set it up back here to help limit how much ground it actually sees. By setting it up in different places and using line of sight to my advantage, I then get to dictate exactly when combat is going to begin and basically how it's going to flow from that point on. So you have to make sure you're checking your line of sights very carefully to make sure that you're putting your troops at optimal ranges and lines of sight, so that you know when combat's going to start, and combat is starting when you are at the greatest advantage. You don't want to be putting troops that aren't great at long range on the edges of maps where they see troops too soon and get engaged before you're truly ready. So if you think you have stronger close range stuff, you want to try to set up troops so that they have to approach to actually get into range, and then actually see them, and then you can use that range advantage to quash that opponent's attack. So it's really important when defending that you're considering those line of sights to make sure that your defense is happening when you want it to happen, and not just when the opponent decides. The final thing I want to talk about with defense is realizing at times it is better to simply fall back and establish a new line of defense rather than holding on to the last man for an area. It's not always good to desperately hold on to an area. So like, for example, over here, if he makes a big push here and pushes me out, I don't really lose anything. Yes, I have this big bulge of territory, and that's great, but it doesn't do anything. There's no flags here. There's no flags even close to here. So if he attacks and pushes me here, instead of pouring in more troops to try to, you know, capture this back, I'll just fall back. There's no reason to stay here. I can fall back to here. I can fall back to here just fine. As long as I'm keeping a solid presence in this area, I don't need to hold on to these frontal areas. And that's part of the layered defense too, is it gives you the flexibility to fall back if things are really not going well. And therefore you don't have to constantly be dumping troops into a bad defense that you have no chance of winning anyway. So you have to remember, at times it's better to simply just fall back, reestablish a defense somewhere else on the map, and go from there. Somewhere that it's even more advantage. Because remember, at the end of the day, defending in Steel Division 2 is easier than attacking. You're basically should be always at an advantage when you're defending, because the opponent has to come to you, and therefore they probably have to leave cover. They probably have to put themselves in a less tactically beneficial place in order to do that. So when you're defending, you should always have the advantage. If you don't, you've not set up a very good defense. Or there's just a massive disparity of troop strength. You know, the attacker has so many more troops, you're just at a disadvantage just because of quantity. But you should still have the advantage in terms of cover, line of sight, and, you know, the ability to react. The other thing is, as you fall back, your reinforcements get there faster and their reinforcements get there slower, which means your reaction time is getting better and theirs is getting worse, which should mean at some point you should be able to successfully push the opponent back, simply because they have to take a very long time to call in reinforcements and react to any kind of move that you make. So that's one thing to remember, is simply falling back 500 meters. While that seems sad in the moment and you're like, well, great, now I've lost territory, it may not be a very big deal, and it's probably benefiting you more, because now your troops are going to get there faster and you're going to be able to react more quickly to those threats as they come. So these are the things that you should be considering when establishing a defense in Steel Division 2. Now, one more thing I want to mention about defense in Steel Division 2. While a great defense is wonderful, it does not win you the game. You have to attack to actually win the game. So remember, just sitting back on your hindquarters and defending the whole game, while that might be enjoyable to chew up your opponent's troops, and you can play a game where your goal is to simply grind the opponent out. They're long, they're very long games, but it's a way of winning, at least at the moment. You know, unless that is your game plan, you're going to have to attack at some point, and what a defense really should be doing is establishing you to make a good attack. Okay, so when you establish a good defense, it should be a jumping off point so that you can make a good attack later from that defensive posturing. So this is, I have set up, when I want to make an attack, I have tons of support in order to make that attack. I can send troops, and if anyone reveals themselves from this wood here, so you can see he's set up very nicely so that they'll only engage when they come into this spot instead of engaging all the way up and down the line here. But when anyone reveals, all these guys should be able to support that attack. So the truth is, at the end of the day, a good defense is really just a good setup for a big attack later. There are light defenses just to kind of hold ground, but those are not advised, and when you can avoid them, you want to avoid them. You want to make good, strong defenses with plenty of support and everything if your goal is to truly make that a main part to fight over, okay? That doesn't mean you can't throw a machine gun here and there just to kind of defend, so you can see you threw a machine gun. That can be very effective. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you truly want to defend and eventually push off from a point, you have to establish a good line with a mix of troops in good cover with good line of sight that can eventually, when the right forces are constituted, can push forward and capture the ground ahead of them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, please hit that like button. Consider subscribing for more Steel Division 2 content, and if you really want some help or you want to support the channel, consider hitting up the Patreon. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a fantastic day.